What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Fish the Moment. During my first couple fishing trips of 2025, I've noticed there are a lot more anglers fishing offshore than ever before. While there are still anglers fishing down the bank in the wintertime, most of the anglers I see are out in the middle of the lake using forward-facing sonar chasing fish that are suspended in open water. These aren't the only fish that are catchable offshore though, and there are still some fish that are being untapped by forward-facing sonar users that I've been targeting to have a lot of success on the lake using traditional 2D sonar, downscan, and side scan views. In this video, I want to explain these unique areas, why they hold a lot of fish, and how you can use them to put a bunch of fish in the boat yourself this winter. Let's get into it. First, let me show you where I'm seeing a lot of anglers fish in 2025 this winter. This is a stretch of Table Rock Lake that has some main lake sections, some bigger creeks, and some smaller creeks. In general, the majority of the anglers I'm seeing there fishing offshore are fishing in the center of bigger creeks from the mouth all the way to the back third. They're fishing in the middle of the creek, floating around, basically targeting fish with forward-facing sonar that are chasing bait balls. There are so many anglers doing this now that it's almost hard to get into any creek that doesn't have a boat or two in it, and I feel like this is going to cause these fish to become more pressured and harder to catch. There are some anglers who are moving more out to the main lake and actually using forward-facing sonar in the middle of the main river channel, maybe up against some bridge pilings or down some deeper bluff walls. There are also anglers that are just fishing down the bank, but there are always going to be guys up there, and I want to talk about offshore areas in this video. So if we look at these highlight areas, there's not much lake left that isn't getting targeted by anglers with forward-facing sonar, but there are a few dead zones or areas that are receiving less pressure, and I'll highlight them here. These are the areas I've been targeting these first few fishing trips of 2025 and had a lot of success by basically getting away from the crowd and targeting fish that aren't getting picked on by other anglers. If we zoom into the map a little bit, we can get a better idea of what these areas are. Basically, they're not major creeks, and they're also basically at the middle of the river channel. Instead, they're smaller pockets or coves off the main lake that still have some type of creek channel running into them. Now, there are some forward-facing sonar guys that are going into these drains or ditches, but I'm not going to worry about fishing that type of area. Instead, I'm going to be fishing the shallower flats that extend out from the bank. Specifically, what I've been looking for are transition areas where the contour lines are pretty tight together, then start to spread out. These are areas that are more likely to have some type of bottom composition change, which is really what I've been focusing on for the first couple of trips this year and having great success. Bottom composition changes are basically places where you go from a smaller type of rock to a bigger type of rock. Most of the time you're going from either pea gravel to some bigger chunk rock or bigger chunk rock to boulders. These areas are going to attract not only shad, but also crawfish. And I think that crawfish are a very overlooked forage that the bass will feed on in the wintertime. I've had some really good trips in the past on Table Rock Lake before forward-facing sonar, targeting these transition areas. I would actually graph these areas and sometimes find bait fish that were setting up on a rounded point or on one of these areas where the contour lines start to tighten up, and there would be a small rock pile or a small boulder pile down there, and there would be a bunch of fish stacked up. I would target these fish with a football jig, a blade bait, and a swim bait. And it's a technique that I haven't used in a few years because I've been using so much forward-facing sonar in the past couple of years, and I have basically got away from fishing these areas. However, they haven't become less effective, and on the contrary, I feel like they're becoming more effective because there are fewer anglers targeting these areas. The reason for that is twofold. One, the fish on these rocky spots are pretty hard to see with forward-facing sonar. They're going to be so tight to the bottom that you're not going to be able to see them very easily just by panning around with your active target. Instead, you have to throw your bait down these areas and watch the fish come up and actually eat your bait, which is a little bit more time consuming, and I feel like a lot of guys just are so focused on the fish floating in the middle of the water column that they completely ignore these fish that are sitting tight to the bottom. You can locate these fish though in a couple of ways. One way is by using your traditional downscan and 2D sonar to graph over these areas and find the fish that are sitting on top of these rocks or really tight to the bottom. Sometimes fish are so tight to the bottom though that you can't actually see them on your 2D sonar or downscan. In these situations, you may just have to graph over these areas and look for rock with bait fish in the area. When you have bait fish in the area, like balls of shad, there's likely to be at least some bass hanging around those rocks, even if you can't actually spot them on the sonar. You can also just fish these areas even if you don't see any shad, because again, there are crawfish sometimes in these areas. And a lot of times when I would fish growing up, I wasn't so worried about seeing fish all the time on my fish finder or shad. I would just find these rock transition areas and fish as many of them as I could with a jig. I wouldn't get maybe as many bites as if I had seen fish on the fish finder, but I would be able to pull my bait through there and catch 1 to 2 fish per area at times. And if I ran 10 of these in a day, sometimes catch 20 to 30 bass in the winter, which is a really good day, especially when the fishing can get pretty tough. Now, most of the time, you're not going to be able to catch a fish off of every single one of these rock transition areas. It's usually going to be 1 fish every 3 to 4 areas. And sometimes you can even pull up and find a big group on these areas and catch 10 to 12 fish. So it kind of depends on the day, but these areas are just being overlooked by a lot of anglers because they're not as easy to pick apart with live sonar. Also, it's not the hot trend in fishing right now. The major trend in fishing is going around using forward-facing sonar to go out in the middle of drains and ditches, basically going around looking for bait balls, throwing at fish, or fishing specifically brush piles or other types of cover where you can clearly see the fish and you can throw a jerkbait or an Alabama rig at them. These fish are on the bottom, though, are just so hard to see on the sonar that a lot of guys won't even try to look for these fish or even bother fishing for them because they only want to make a cast when they see a dot on the screen. And that, I believe, gives the advantage back to anglers who just have access to 2D sonar downscan and side scan views. Now, this isn't the only pattern that is underutilized or kind of off the grid right now. And there's a lot of these patterns I'm actually going to be talking about in an upcoming seminar on fishthemoment.com. This seminar is dedicated to catching fish that forward-facing sonar anglers are missing. And while I'm talking specifically about highland reservoirs with rock in this video, there are so many different patterns that are getting overlooked that catch really big fish and have for years. And it's to the point that these fish aren't even really seeing baits anymore, so they're so easy to catch when you get in the area. This seminar is going to be on Friday, February 7th, so definitely sign up if you want to regain your advantage over these forward-facing sonar fishermen and do really well just fun fishing or in tournaments this spring. Now that I've gone over the basics of this pattern, I actually want to show you clips from an old video from several years ago where I caught a bunch of fish on this specific pattern. The video didn't get that many views, so you probably haven't seen these clips before, but they're very relevant right now, and I absolutely smashed them in January on Table Rock using the exact pattern we're talking about. I'll go into detail showing you my sonar recordings and catching fish, so hopefully you guys enjoy this old clip with pre-forward facing footage of me catching offshore bass in the wintertime.
Now that's what I'm talking about, getting some tanks out here. Yes! Man, I don't know why I was so stubborn with that jerkbait all day long, because I mean, I came out here for 30 minutes, guys, and I'm loading the boat offshore out here on these rock piles. And it's just crazy because I know I catch a lot of good fish on a football jig this time of year offshore, but I was so stubborn trying to force that jerkbait bite that wasn't happening for me. I just come out here and catch some awesome fish here in 30, 35 foot of water. This is crazy. You get back down there though, because they are chewing. Man, these are some big spotted bass out here. What the heck? Look at these spots. Oh my gosh. That is a big one. Actually looks like a mean, or it looks like a mean mouth actually, but that is a tank of a fish right there. Same exact big. Sorry, so I'm so excited I caught fish today. I was struggling so much. I hate coming out and just not catching anything. And so it's just great to get these fish in the boat. Just throwing a 1/2 ounce Jewel football jig. It's actually a prototype jig. I'm working out with Jewel that might be coming out as a Fish the Moment branded jig. But just a 1/2 ounce football jig. And man, that is a nice one. Probably about a 3-pounder. I'm gonna weigh this guy actually because he's so big. Well, not quite, a 2 3/4. But 270, that's a pretty big mean mouth right there. That's a good one. Oh man, love catching fish offshore on the football jig. That's 3 fish in like 15 minutes, guys. And I didn't get a bite all day with that jerk bait. So sometimes just changing it up, going what you have confidence in, definitely works. Oh, I'll put this guy back. Nice, 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 nice. Woo! That's what I'm talking about, guys. Love it, love it. Man, these fish are set perfectly on the graph too. And you know, if we go back to these images I was showing earlier, these fish are just stacked up right on the break. There's shad down there, there's fish all over the graph. And you know, these are the type of spots that I look for in the wintertime. And a lot of times it might take 2, 3, 4 hours of graphing to find them. And so a lot of times you might go, you know, 200, 300 yards, maybe even a couple miles of the lake before you find a spot like this. But in the wintertime, usually if you spend enough time graphing around offshore, you're going to find an area where they're stacked up like this where you can catch them really quick. And you know, you can catch them on a football jig like I am now. I also have a jigging spoon just in case if I see some fish underneath the boat. And so, you know, hopefully I'm gonna be able to get a few more fish off this spot. I have to get going here in a few minutes. The sun's about to go down, so I can't sit out here for too much longer, but I'm having a blast. I don't want to leave.
So let's take a closer look at the area where I'm catching these fish. And it's basically just a long, tapering offshore point that drops off on two sides into a deeper creek channel. And on top of these points, you have several game and fish rock piles that they've planted. And I checked the rock piles as shallow as 15 feet of water and as deep as 45 feet of water, but I found the majority of the bait and the fish was in that 25 to 35 foot zone. And if we take a look at my down imaging from this spot, you can see there are just fish all over the place. And a lot of these dots are stacked pretty close together, but they're not more than 2 or 3 dots, maybe 4 dots tall, which let me know that these were bass. And if you do want to learn how to identify bass in your fish finder, check out this video up here. And I knew immediately that I could get these fish to bite. But one thing I did notice is that these fish were spread out pretty far along this drop. Basically, from the first rock pile for about 50 yards to the next rock pile. And the fish weren't really positioning on one particular rock pile. They were just kind of roaming up and down the edge of this point, moving from rock pile to rock pile. And that kind of has to do with the cloud cover we had on this day, and that cloud cover a lot of times makes these fish roam around. And so I started just throwing that football jig down there, and I got some really good bites. So after catching 3 good fish on the football jig, I started having fish just peck the jig or short strike it. And a lot of times what happens on these areas that have spotted bass mixed with largemouth is that the bigger fish will eat that football jig first, but then the smaller fish won't actually be able to get the football jig all the way in their mouth. And so I decided to switch up to a bait that had a little bit smaller profile and had some treble hooks, and that's actually a blade bait. And a blade bait is basically just a big hunk of metal that has some hooks on it, and it vibrates when you move it up and down. And I threw that bait down there and got a couple fish to hit it before I actually connected with one, but then finally I hooked a fish.
Some extra bites by changing baits, and it definitely worked here. There we go. Look at that right there, blade bait fish. Not as big as the football jig fish, but still a decent one. This is just a, I think it's called a ledge hog blade bait. I'll put a link in the description with the bait, but that's a nice little spotted bass right there on the old blade bait. That's what I'm talking about. And if you guys never fished a blade bait before offshore for fish, all you have to do is, let me get it hung real quick. It's super simple. All you have to do is fire that bait out there, let it sink down to the bottom, and basically it's just a hunk of metal with some hooks hanging on it. So it doesn't work that great when you're fishing around brush or like wood, but if you're fishing like rock piles like I am here, it's a great bait. And all you have to do is just kind of lift your rod tip up. That bait will vibrate as it goes up and let it fall back down to the bottom, and just repeat that retrieve. And you don't want to pull it super violently. You just want to pull it 2-3 feet off the bottom, and it works really well when those fish are right on the bottom, but they're kind of lethargic in the winter, kind of like they are here. And sometimes that bait gets kind of hung up. You have to hop it a few times, but basically you just want to feel that vibration of that bait moving up and down, and every once in a while want to come up and grab it.
And one thing I really like about this specific blade bait I'm using is that it's a 3/4 ounce blade bait, which means I can cover quite a bit of water with it, even when I'm fishing in 30 to 35 feet of water. And like I mentioned earlier, we have these cloudy skies, which is causing these fish to roam across this point. And so a lot of times, dragging that jig down slowly is not a very efficient way to fish these areas, but fishing that blade bait up and down off the bottom is a great way to intercept those fish that are roaming around this point. and I seem to get a lot more bites on the blade bait than I did on the football jig, and I could also get them to connect with it when they swiped at it, just because I was throwing the treble hooks on it. So really quick guys, if you enjoy this video and want to support more content from Fish the Moment, one easy and free way to do that is by going to my website, fishthemoment.com, then going to the Support Fish the Moment tab at the top of the screen. This will take you to a page with a couple different ways to support my channel, and one of those is my Tackle Warehouse affiliate link. All you have to do is click on this link, it'll take you straight to Tackle Warehouse, and then if you check out on Tackle Warehouse using that link, I'll get a small percentage of the profits from any purchases you make. And the way this works basically is that there's a little tag at the end of the Tackle Warehouse URL, !from=Fish the Moment, and anytime you use that link, they'll know that I sent you to the website. And so one way to make sure you always use this link when you shop at Tackle Warehouse is just to bookmark the page and add that to your bookmarks bar. That way, anytime you go to Tackle Warehouse from that bookmark link, you'll be taken straight to Tackle Warehouse using my link, and I'll always get credit for all your purchases. So if you do like the content on my YouTube channel and want to support me further, this is a really easy and free way to do it, and I really appreciate you guys taking a few minutes to do that.
There we go. Getting them side swung, they're swiping at it. It's another spotted bass though here on that blade bait. Sometimes they'll swipe at that thing and miss it. It's kind of what they were doing to that football jig earlier. That's kind of why I went to the blade bait. A lot of times when they're just missing that football jig, a lot of times in these cloudy sky days, they'll do that. Picking up that blade bait or some other bait that's kind of like a moving bait, sometimes we'll get those fish in the boat a little bit better. And so definitely try that on these cloudy days. On the sunny days, those fish will lock down on the rocks a little bit better, and you won't have to worry about them missing the football jig, and also it'll cause them to roam a lot less. Right now these fish are kind of roaming around. I'm seeing them all underneath my boat, all over the grass, and you kind of just see them all up and down this drop. There's 3 or 4 rock piles on this drop, and it's just kind of interesting because on these cloudy days these fish love to roam, but on the sunny days they'll go straight to the rocks. They'll get right in a tight group. You can catch them just one after another. And so kind of have to play it by ear offshore by the day, but man, this has definitely turned my day around. In about 45 minutes of fishing, I already put 5 fish in the boat and missed several others. Oh, got another one. Oh, my camera in the back just died, so we're gonna have to do this old-fashioned style with my front chest camera on the GoPro. This blade bait is definitely working. These fish are a lot smaller on the blade bait, but they're still eating it. Here we go. Another one on the blade bait. Now we're really putting some damage to them. Okay guys, so the sun's about to set, so I'm gonna head out of here, but I had to blast salvaging my day with that blade bait and the football jig offshore in these rock piles. And it just goes to show, sometimes the dock talk and what the local guides or the local reports tell you is working doesn't always work for you. It's hard to catch other people's fish, and so if you're struggling on the water, trying to do what everyone else is doing, try something different, stick to what you know, what you have confidence in, and a lot of times it'll help you put a lot more fish in the boat. So thanks again for checking this video guys, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all next